In our reading from Genesis today, we pick up Abraham's narrative at a really low point. And by the way, Abraham and Abram are the same person, just as Sarah is called Sarai for the first part of this narrative. So anyway, we pick up the narrative at a really low point. And to appreciate this, it's important to view the story not with the hindsight of knowing how it ends, but as Abraham experiences it. Back in chapters 11 and 12, we learned that Abraham and his wife Sarah are childless, but that God promises Abraham, I will make of you a great nation. And on that promise alone, Abraham obeys God's commandment to set out from his home, to settle in the land that I will show you, as God puts it. Now, we're in chapter 15. Many adventures and much wandering and waiting later, and still no offspring. Abraham and Sarah are well past childbearing years. So when the Lord comes to him in today's passage to renew the promise, his skepticism is understandable. Oh Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir to my house is Eliezer of Damascus. Nothing against Eliezer or anything. He's a stand-up guy, a conscientious worker. But you know, Lord, he's my employee, not my kid. So we're kind of out of luck here. In a nutshell, God's response is, believe me anyway. Take my word for it. One day your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the night sky. And on this word alone, against all evidence, against the years of waiting, against the irrefutable barrenness of the present, the text tells us Abraham believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. In other words, Abraham continued to act with faith. Abraham continued to do what he felt God was calling him to do, even though the outcome was manifestly hopeless. To me, this touches on a very deep problem of this faith that we are trying to live. It's the same problem I encountered when someone recently told me that when they practiced turning their will over to God, it always worked out. God kept them safe. God placed them where they needed to be in the world. God had a plan for their life that was clearly coming true. Now, this is a fine way to believe in God if it works for you. I am not here to argue with others' faith experience. I can only say that I can't believe in a God who manipulates events around my little life in that puppet master kind of way. God, in my experience, is just way too big, way too mysterious for that. Besides which, from my point of view, there's just no morally acceptable place to file the implication that people who are unlucky have somehow not sufficiently turned their will over to God. Whoever or whatever God may be, God is not, in my experience, a being who rewards faithfulness with safety and good fortune. And I say this as someone who has so far been extraordinarily lucky in my own life. Am I grateful? You bet. But for me, faith in God has more to do with finding a thriving relationship to reality, even when reality is as random or hopeless or dark as it can be. That's really the situation that Abraham is in here. Bible scholar Walter Brueggemann puts the conundrum this way. Why and how does one continue to trust solely in the promise of God when the evidence against the promise is all around? Even so, Abraham believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. Well, easy for Abraham, we might think. He does end up with many descendants in the end. But what about when there are no miracles forthcoming? What about when there is no clear promise, as in this contemporary post-miraculous age? On her NPR show On Being last week, Krista Tippett was interviewing a woman named Colette Pichon Battle. Battle grew up in a poor community in the Louisiana Bayou and ended up becoming a lawyer with that community's help and support. She described the land her family had owned for several hundred years, since before it was part of the United States, and how important that land had been in establishing them as free Black people and not slaves. She talked about being raised in the house her grandfather built and in which her mother was born, about the sense of belonging she felt to the landscape, the ancient oak trees, the bridges over the bayous, about the way her family gathered to cook and eat and calm each other during hurricanes. And then she described how Hurricane Katrina had swamped even the high ground they lived on, and how in the past 15 years she has witnessed the rise of sea levels in real time, the brackish water saturating the land, sucking down centuries-old trees. At one point, she attended a researcher's presentation where he instructed people to point to their home community on a map of South Louisiana that was projected onto the wall. Then he played a time lapse of sea levels rising in the coming years. She watched the coastline slide past the spot her finger was touching. The presenter explained that even if humans were successful in reversing climate change, going forward, these areas are going to be lost. Their fate is sealed. Battle said, I couldn't believe that what I saw was that this place I hold so dear, that I had such a long memory of, not because I was old, but because all my life I had been told stories from a very long time ago. All of those stories are going to go. All of the trees that we sat under are going to go. Everything that I knew to be like who I was, even describing just who I am and where I'm from, was going to go. It's going to be lost. Battle is in that place of utter barrenness in which Abraham and Sarah find themselves in today's reading. That place of hopelessness in which the tragic future is already locked in. She's on the front edge of the climate apocalypse we are all entering. Only she is also facing the fact that, as the head of FEMA admitted to her, disaster relief laws are written to protect the middle class, mostly white. These laws do not protect or benefit Battle and her community by design. And yet here's what she says about how she's responded to this hopeless situation. To understand what is happening to the planet, it will break your heart. If you don't cry deep, hard tears for the state of this planet and all of the people on it, you don't yet understand the problem. And so once you get to that place, the only thing that can bring you out of that kind of darkness is belief in something greater than yourself. And for me, it is that spiritual connection. For me, it's understanding a greater purpose. And then your job becomes less about passing a piece of legislation and more about making a better world. And so for me, this is absolutely spirit now. I mean, what do we have to lose? Well, we're going to lose everything. So, and my last name is Battle. We're going to lose everything, and my last name is Battle. What am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to fight. I'm supposed to fight, but I'm supposed to fight with tools that build people up, not tools that take people down and take them out. And that's love. That's patience. That's all of those things that they taught you in Sunday school. How do we find a thriving relationship to reality, even when reality is as random or hopeless or dark as it can be? Why and how does one continue to trust solely in the promise of God when the evidence against the promise is all around? How do we access the faith of Abraham, who despite utter hopelessness believed, had faith in the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness? Amen.